Hello, everyone, and welcome. I would like to begin by congratulating Epoch Foundation on their 30th anniversary. I would also like to express my gratitude for the important work that the Epoch Foundation has done over the past few decades. Today, I'm going to talk to you about positive leadership and how the science of happiness can help us as leaders, as managers, as parents, introduce more well-being and more success into our various domains. Now, talking about happiness in difficult times is difficult. Why? Because the question must arise, what is the relevance of the science of happiness today? When we see levels of depression skyrocketing, when we see levels of stress and anxiety at an all-time high. What is the relevance of the science of happiness today? In fact, one of my friends recently said to me, Tal, shouldn't we quarantine happiness, at least for a while? Well, my answer to that is no. In fact, I strongly believe that today it is eminently important to draw on this science. It's important for leadership, for management, for parenting, for personal and professional domains. Why is it so important? To answer this question, I'd like to draw on a concept that was coined by Nassim Taleb from New York University. Nassim Taleb introduced the idea of anti-fragility. Anti-fragility, the opposite of fragility. One way to think about this concept is through the evolution of resilience 1.0 to resilience 2.0. What is resilience? Well, resilience originally is a term taken from engineering. It referred to a material that when you put pressure on it, stressed it, it went back to its original form. So a piece of rubber, you squish it, if it's resilient, it goes back to where it was before. Or a ball, if it's resilient, you drop it and it bounces back up. That's resilience 1.0, the original meaning of the word. Resilience 2.0, which is anti-fragility, is taking this idea a step further. It's when you put pressure on stress on certain material, it doesn't just go back to where it was before. It actually grows bigger, stronger, better as a result of the pressure and stress. Or if you have a ball, if it's resilient, it bounces back up. If it's anti-fragile, resilience 2.0, it bounces back higher than it was originally. Now, it turns out that there are anti-fragile systems all around us and within us. And understanding these systems and applying this concept to our lives can be very important for the leader, for the manager, for the parent, for the individual, and for the organization. Let me give you two examples of anti-fragile systems, one physiological, the other psychological. When it comes to our physiology, let's look at stressing muscles. What happens when we do so? So we go to the gym and we lift weight, put stress on them, and then we lift more weights. And after 2 days, we go back and put more stress on the muscles. As a result of this stress, our muscles don't just go back to where they were before. They're not merely resilient. Our muscles actually grow bigger, stronger, healthier as a result of that stress. Our muscular system is an anti-fragile system. Let me now share with you a psychological example. So most of the students in my classes, not all, but most, are psychology majors. And I always ask my students the following question. I ask them to put their hand up if they know what PTSD is. PTSD, post post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, just about all students put their hand up, whether they're psychologists or not. They've heard of PTSD. They've read about post-traumatic stress disorder in previous courses, in the newspapers. They know what it is. Their hand is up. And then I ask them to put their hand down. And I pose a second question. I ask them to put their hand up if they know what PTG is. Put your hand up if you know what PTG is. Very few, if any, hands go up, whether they're psychologists or not. PTG stands for post-traumatic growth, which very few people are familiar with. Now, here is the thing. Post-traumatic growth is potentially twice as likely as post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic growth, which is anti-fragility, is twice as likely as post-traumatic stress disorder, which is fragility. If, and this is a big if, first of all, we know that it's possible. And you see, most people don't know about the possibility of post-traumatic growth. And therefore, most people will not experience it. The second thing is that there are certain conditions that we can put in place that will significantly increase the likelihood that we enjoy post-traumatic growth, that we become anti-fragile rather than remain fragile. Now, most people don't know about the possibility of post-traumatic growth. Most people certainly don't know about the conditions that they can put in place to increase the likelihood thereof. Not guarantee, unfortunately, but significantly increase the likelihood. And here lies the purpose of the science of happiness in difficult times. First of all, to introduce us to ideas such as post-traumatic growth, such as anti-fragility. And second, to introduce us to the conditions that we can put in place personally, professionally, individual, for our organizations. And these conditions will make growth, development more likely. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not romanticizing hardships or difficulties or trauma. These are, by definition, unwanted, undesirable experiences. However, when they do happen, as is the case in today's world with a pandemic, it has happened. The question then is, what can we do with it? So while things do not necessarily happen for the best, we can choose to make the best of things that happen. And this is where the science of happiness can help. And what I'd like to do now is share with you a number of conditions that you can put in place as a leader, as a manager, as a parent, as an individual in your personal life and your professional life. Conditions that you can put in place to make post-traumatic growth, to make anti-fragility more likely. The first condition that I'd like to introduce is what I've come to call the permission to be human. The permission to be human is about accepting, embracing any and all emotions, whether it's sadness, anxiety, whether it's anger, envy, or frustration. Why is it so important to embrace, to accept painful emotions? Because when we reject these emotions intensify, they grow stronger. And it is paradoxically, when we allow these emotions to flow through us freely, that is when these emotions do not overstay their welcome. They leave just as they came. We see in organizations where managers and employees do not give place for emotions, that we find more of them and they become more debilitating, more harmful, more controlling of our behavior. Because you see, emotions in and of themselves are not good or bad. They simply are, just like the law of gravity is not good or bad, it's part of nature. Where we do enter the moral domain, where things become good or bad, is when we encounter behavior. And we have more control over our behaviors when we accept and embrace our emotions. How do we accept and embrace our emotions? Well, there are various ways. One way is by shedding a tear. That's expressing rather than suppressing emotion. Another way is by talking about it, whether it's talking about it with a therapist or a coach, or our best friend, or our colleague, or our partner. People whom we trust. And by expressing our emotion, they flow through us and do not overstay their welcome. This is why we feel so much better after a good talk. And finally, another way of expressing rather than suppressing emotion is through writing, by keeping a journal. The next condition that I would like to introduce has to do with a pandemic that long preceded the coronavirus, and that is the stress pandemic. You see, the antidote to stress is not no stress. Unfortunately, that's not realistic, certainly not for managers and leaders and employees in general. Stress is part and parcel of life, and it's something we can deal with, and we can deal with it well. What we need when we experience stress is recovery, because it is recovery that triggers the anti-fragile system. I mean, think about the analogy I used just a few minutes ago. When you go to the gym and you lift weights, and then you lift more weights and more weights, and then the following day you lift even more and more, that's a problem. Why? Because that's when you get injured. That's when you get weaker rather than stronger. What you need is to introduce recovery into your practice, into your exercise regime. Because when you take a few minutes off between sets, or when you take a day off between sessions, that's when your anti-fragile system is triggered. That's when you grow stronger, healthier, better off. So stress without recovery means fragility. Stress with recovery means anti-fragility. The reason why today stress levels are skyrocketing, why we see so much breakdown, so much burnout, is not because of the stress. It's because we do not introduce enough recovery into our lives. Now, what does recovery look like? Well, it could be 30, 40 seconds of deep nostril breathing all the way down to the belly. Why? Because it shifts us from the stress response, fight or flight, to the relaxation response. And that's recovery. Or it could be in the form of having a coffee break or a meal with friends or colleagues, but not coffee or meal when the phone is on and we're doing work at the same time. That's not recovery. That's simply more stress. Another form of recovery is getting a good night's sleep. And if you don't fall asleep, just lie down, read. Or a day off as a form of recovery. You know, even God needed a day off. I think there's an important message here for us mere mortals. Or a vacation as recovery. J.P. Morgan once said, I can do the work of a year in 9 months, but not in 12. I can do the work of a year in 9 months, but not in 12. Well, most of us don't have the luxury of taking 3 months off, but even a month off or 2 weeks or a week off can help us recover and can help trigger the anti-fragile system. Moving on to the next condition for anti-fragility, which can also be seen as a form of recovery, physical exercise. There is so much research showing that regular physical exercise contributes to our well-being, dealing with depression, with anxiety, with other emotional, psychological afflictions, as effectively as our most powerful psychiatric medication. In fact, it works in the same way, releasing norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine. These are your feel-good chemicals in the brain. Now, exercise is important for all ages. You know, our 3 teenagers spent most of the last 2 years on Zoom, not going to school, like most kids around the world. During those 2 years, I never asked them how they were doing academically. If they wanted, they told me. If there was a problem, the teacher called. But every day I would make sure that they exercised by themselves, with friends, or with us. Why? Because I know the importance of physical exercise for their development, psychological and physical development. For adults in the workplace, exercise contributes significantly, not just to physical health, also to mental health and to performance, to teamwork, to our ability to focus and concentrate. At any age. John Ratey from Harvard Medical School demonstrated that people who exercise later on in their lives, well, that reduces the likelihood of Alzheimer and dementia by 52%. There's no medication that works as well, as powerfully as exercise does. So physical exercise makes us tougher physically as well as psychologically. It makes us more resilient. It makes us more anti-fragile. And then there is giving. It turns out that one of the best ways to help ourselves is by helping others. Why? Well, think about this. The difference between sadness and depression is that depression is sadness without hope. Now, what does helping others do for us? It takes us from sometimes feeling helpless to feeling helpful. And related to that is feeling hopeless to feeling hopeful. And it's when we have hope, it's when we feel helpful, that is when we're in a much better place to overcome difficulties and hardships. Now, what does giving look like? Well, it can be giving charity, or it can be spiritual giving in the form of kindness. Research by Sonia Lubimirsky from UC Riverside shows that introducing 5 extra acts of kindness a week, they don't have to be major, they can be small. 5 extra acts of kindness contributes to our overall well-being. We become more resilient, we become more anti-fragile when we contribute, when we help others. For leaders, arguably the most powerful form of giving is through listening. This is the #1 predictor of extraordinary leadership. Not how charismatic the leader is, not how eloquent the leader is. It's not about how brilliant or how well they can think strategically. It's first and foremost, especially in difficult times, through listening. And once again, when I talk about leader, I mean the manager in the organization, I mean the parent at home. And finally, what's very important when we give is to remember ourselves. Just like with the oxygen mask, if we are to take care of others, to be others' stewards, we need to first and foremost take care of ourselves. Because if we don't, then giving, caring is not sustainable. How do we take care of ourselves as leaders? Well, first and foremost, by giving ourselves the permission to be human. How? By shedding a tear, by sharing our emotions, by writing about them. Then, through recovery, whether it's the 30 seconds of deep breathing, the meditation, the meal with our loved ones, or by taking a day off or a vacation. Then it's through physical exercise, because it's through physical exercise that we don't just become physically stronger, we also become mentally tougher, cultivating resilience, anti-fragility. And finally, through giving. This is about listening, about being generous, about being kind, not just to others, also to ourselves. Because it is when we help ourselves that we indirectly help others. It is then that we make the world, our world, a better, healthier, happier place, even in difficult times.